About a month ago, some of my favorite books in the Bible, they're history books in the first part of the Bible. They're called 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and they tell the history of Israel. I love history. As I get older and become a part of it, I just find it more and more fascinating. But there's a story in there that I read about a month ago, and I'd read it years ago, but this time when I read it, there were a couple of phrases that I've not been able to get out of my mind. For a month, I've not been able to stop thinking about these. And I thought, well, maybe it's because there's something more to talk about. If you've never read those stories, there's a story in there about a man named King Asa. And Asa started out as a really good king. He was the king of the southern part of Israel called Judah. And when he took over as the king, he immediately started to do everything he could to turn the nation's heart right toward God, which was good. And then early in his time as the king, one day from the south came an army of 1 million men. A massive army. There was no way they could win this battle. He did not have enough. And so he got his armies together and they went out to meet him. This army had invaded the southern part of his territory. He lined his army up against them. They knew that this is a terrible thing. And when he stood there in front of his army, he prayed this incredible prayer of humility in request for help from God. And he had no idea what was about to happen. But incredibly, in 2 Chronicles chapter 14, God showed up and fought the battle for him. He fought the battle for him. And so, Asa and his entire army watched as God defeated their enemy. The only thing that happened that day, the only injuries were, pulled backs from carrying all the loot back because there was just so much to pick up as God had done this incredible thing. Pulled muscles, that's all there was. Nothing else. It was just this incredible victory from God. And so this is how it starts. And it turned the whole nation even more back to God. And so they had all these spiritual and religious reforms and so many cool things are happening. And this went on for years and years and years until late in the reign of King Asa, it happened again. God had given him supernatural peace from all of his enemies. And then all of a sudden, from the north this time, 2 kings got together and said, let's go attack Asa. And so they aligned themselves and came down and attacked. Matter of fact, they marched all the way down to within 8 miles of Jerusalem, which was the capital of Asa. It was Asa's capital city. They got within 8 miles. And they formed this kind of blockade so that there was no way for Asa to go north at all. And so Asa's obviously pretty naturally stressed. He's facing this, what looks like certain defeat. And so this time he sits in his palace and he comes up with a plan and he's like, I got a plan. And so he sends his servants out and they strip every ounce of gold from the temple of God. They take all the gold from the palace. They pile it onto these huge wagons and they send it up north to one of the 2 kings that are allied against him. He sends all the gold. And he says to this king, he says, listen, once you break your alliance with them, I will give you all this gold if you'll break the alliance. And instead turn and attack the other king. And the king takes a look at all this gold and he's like, deal. He takes all the gold and then he sends his armies to attack the other king. Well, now that king is in trouble, so he has to bring all of his armies up there. They go up there to fight up here. And now Asa's got his whole armies and he's free and he sends them across the border to just kind of loot everything. And everybody comes back and it's a huge victory and everybody's excited. And Asa sitting there going, this is amazing. Look what I've just figured out. And then what happens in the story is that God sends his prophet to Asa and God says, because you have put your trust in the king, this other king, instead of in the Lord your God, he said this, you missed your chance. You missed your chance. You missed your chance to be free of this enemy. You missed your chance to experience God. He goes on to say to him, don't you remember how God helped you the last time you were facing an enemy army? Don't you remember that? You missed your chance to experience it again. You missed your chance. He said, at that time when you relied on the Lord and he handed that army over to you, and he would have done it again. And now you just missed your chance because you never even relied on God. Instead, you just figured it all out yourself. And the king is furious, and it actually, his life kind of goes really down downhill from there. And here's why I'm telling you that, because the truth is, the story scares me. Because I read what the king did later in his life, and I'm like, I'd have done that. That's me. That's many of you too. Problems come up, and what do? You sit down and you make your plan. What am I going to do? How am I going to solve this? How am I going to figure this out? I got to figure this out. I got to figure this out. I'm going to do this. Maybe I can do this. Maybe if I take all the gold out of the palace and I maybe take it out of the temple of God too, and I bring it up there, maybe I can make an alliance. And this is a great, clever plan. And we work and work and work, and we figure it all out on ourselves, and we miss out. Because we never rely on God in the middle of the problems or the trials or the adversity that we're dealing with. And we miss out. And that really concerned me when I read that phrase. Here's what I'm afraid of. What I'm really afraid of, and I know this is going to happen to me, so I'm just letting you know. I don't want it to happen to you too. I know when I go in and I'm in heaven and I get to look back on my life and all the trials and problems I encountered, that I will see what I did and what God himself was willing to do if I would have relied on him at all, and I will feel this sadness from knowing that I missed out. Now, this is really relevant because we've been in this series for a while on dealing with the stresses and strains of life. And one of the things that makes life so stressful is the truth is that you and I face trials and adversity that are bigger than us. And we make ourselves a little bit overwhelmed and crazy and anxious trying to solve all these things ourselves because we don't rely on God. And it's time to stop missing out. It's time to stop missing out. So we're going to finish this series today, and I want to talk about, using Asa's story, how to break free from the stress that's caused by self-reliance. What a strange title, right? In America, that'd be like the best thing ever. You're just self-reliant. Way to go. You pulled yourself up by your bootstraps. Awesome. And in the Bible, it's the wrong approach. In America, it's the right approach, but can I ask you to think about this too? When you look around at America, are we doing okay with this self-reliant approach? Are we healthy emotionally? We're just so calm. we don't have any stress or worry and anxiety. Nobody's medicated, right? We don't see any problems with this self-reliant approach. Yeah, we're falling apart and fracturing because it was never intended to be this way. So I want to talk to you about this today. I want to ask you to grab your program inside, grab your notes, take these out. Welcome to those of you who are watching online, of course. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, if you go to our website at penuelchurchlife.com, you can download these notes as well. Super important as we finish this series. So let's jump right into this. The first thing is you have to remember what God's offer is for you. You have to remember what God's offer is. If you're going to switch from being self-reliant to God-reliant, you got to know what he's actually offering. Now, thankfully, there are plenty of TV evangelists that you can go home and watch this afternoon who will tell you that what God is offering is he's offering to make you rich. Isn't that great news? Great news. He's offering to make it so you have no problems, except that, how am I going to get fuel for my jet? That's a problem. But other than that, he's going to just make everything better and you'll never have a problem and everything will go smooth sailing. And there are plenty of, and all you have to do is send them money and God will start doing this for you. It's the world that we live in, and it's not true at all, of course. All of you are smart enough to know that that's a con job. It's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. But he said, be of good cheer, I've overcome the world. So he said, in this world you're going to have difficulty. All of you have it. You're going to have trials. Some of you are in the middle of some big trials today. There are really challenging things happening in your life. And God has said, but that's what Jesus said. It's crazy to say, so in your trials, I want you to be cheerful. And the reason for our cheer is Jesus is present with us. That's the reason for our cheer. That he said, I will help you because do you know this about God? God cares about every single detail of everything that's happening in your life today. Do you know that? Everything you're worried about, everything you're stressed about, everything you're anxious about, he cares about. And he said, I promise that I will be there with you and I'm willing to help you. And that's the offer from God. Let me show you one of my favorite verses on this. Hebrews chapter 4, it says, "Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." There's so much in this verse to unpack. Look at this. So the first thing he says I want you to do is approach God. And approach him with confidence. By the way, you do this through prayer. That's how you do it. When you pray, you can picture yourself walking into the throne room of the King of all kings. He is seated on his throne, and when we pray, we approach him, and he says, I want you to approach him with confidence. By the way, the confidence doesn't come from anything we offer, right? I'm not confident because of who I am. I'm confident because of what Jesus has done for me. Because of Jesus in my life, I can be confident. And then he says there's two things you can get from God anytime you need them. Look at this. Mercy. You know what mercy is? Mercy is God is withholding punishment when you deserve it. So all of us deserve it. All of us have done things that are wrong. And mercy is, that's why we talk a lot about confession in our church. It's why we talk about it at communion. It's like it's important for us to come to God and say, I own this. It was wrong. Please show your mercy to me. What you're saying when you ask for mercy is withhold the punishment I know I deserve for this. That's mercy. And he says you can always get that from him. And then he says the other thing you can get is even cooler. It's grace. Grace is just giving us stuff. It's just helping us. And notice, when in our times of need, that's when he wants to help us. So if you have needs and you go to him for grace, then that's what he says you will experience, is that you will experience his grace. So let me ask you to think about this way. Let's say that, okay, I'm going to give you a couple elements. Let's say that you lose your job, or if you're in a home with two wage earners, you both lose your job, or one of you loses your job, and things are really, really tight financially. Matter of fact, you have no savings left in a short time. And then one day, your car, the only one that's really reliable, breaks down, and you take it into the shop. It's $4,000 to get it fixed. You don't have $4,000. You don't even know if you have enough credit limit on your credit card to charge the repair. So you get the picture. So you are just really, really, really in need. But the good news is, Jim Walton is your uncle. So you know the Walton name? Jim Walton is the heir to the Walmart fortune. He's currently worth, as of this week, $67 billion. So I went online. I wanted to see what that was. If he's only earning 6% interest on $67 billion, I wanted to say, I Googled this. How much does he earn every second of the day on $67 billion? He earns $130 per second, doing absolutely nothing on his $67 billion. So let's say that Jim Walton is your uncle. He just loves you. Oh my goodness, you're his favorite. He sends you a birthday card every year. He sends you a Christmas present. He calls you all the time. He's just so fascinated by your life. He just loves you. And he constantly says to you, oh my goodness, if you ever need anything, just ask, just ask, just ask. And so you are on the edge of financial collapse. You've got no way to pay for this. You can't even afford it. So you decide finally to call Mr. Walton and you say, can I have 30 seconds of your interest? That's all you're asking for, right? 30 seconds of the interest on your money. That's all I'm asking for. 30 seconds, because that'll cover the bill. And he's like, I'm happy to help. And off you go, and your problem is solved, and your need is taken care of. Now, the interesting thing is, we would have, as human beings, an easier time, most of us, trusting in Jim Walton than we do trusting and relying on God Almighty. But here's the reality. God's richer than Jim Walton. Jim only temporarily has that. God has it all. And as nice as Jim Walton is, I'm sure, as a human being, God is more loving. And God has made all of us very specific promises that he will help us in our times of need. And yet most of us would turn more to ourselves quicker or turn to a person faster than we would to God. But he has promised, I'm here. I promise I will help you in your need. So what that means is we understand what he's promised, and number two, we turn quickly to God in those stressful moments when things are going difficult, when they're falling apart, when they're challenging. We turn quickly to God in those stressful moments. I would love to have written down, turn immediately to God. But I can't say that honestly without getting struck by lightning, okay? Because I don't do this. I don't do that. As quickly as you can, turn to God. I'm not good at this, so that's why I wanted to be really honest with you. In the story of Asa's life, when it was going so well, it's what he did. It doesn't say that he turned immediately. When the scope of the problem became real to him, and he lines his army up and he looks out across at the army that's facing him and he goes, we're doomed, then he turned to God. That's okay. The point is that you're turning to God. The goal is eventually to turn immediately to God. But as quickly as you can, turn to God. And here's what I want you to think about today. What if the worst thing that's happening in your life right now, what if the most challenging thing that's happening in your life right now is really been permitted by God because it's an opportunity for you to experience his love and his power changing something you could never change? What if that's what's going on? What if the biggest trial in your life today is really a setup for you to be able to experience God's love and power in your life in ways you've never experienced it? What if that's what's going on? In the New Testament, Paul wrote about it this way. One time, Paul and his friends who were traveling with him on these mission trips were facing persecution. They were arrested. They were facing violence. And here's what they said about their situation. Indeed, we felt we'd received the sentence of death. So in other words, they thought they were going to die. We're just trying to tell people about Jesus, and there's lots of opposition, and people were trying to kill him. And then he said this, but this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. Do you hear what he was saying? Why did it happen? To break that self-reliance. So they would stop relying on themselves and start relying on God. And he said, and God came through. Here's what he goes on to say. And God has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver him. And so there's this positive outcome. They get to experience God. He sets them free, and their faith grows, and their hope and trust are in him and him alone. And all of it comes from this. This happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. What if that is why this has happened in your life, whatever this is? What if that's why you're struggling with something today? What if this happened so that you would stop relying on yourselves and you would start relying on God so you could start experiencing God? Flip your notes over on the back. Look at this again. At the top, I put this down. So God, these are the situations that are stressing me out today. What would you put down? And go ahead and fill it in if you feel comfortable doing that. And you could use code if you're sitting, maybe the person who's stressing you out is sitting next to you, so you can just put code ski. So, right? So, but some of you, the biggest things that are stressing you out, the trials in your life are a broken relationship, right? Things are not going the way you want them to go. For some of you, it's something with your career. You don't like your job. You don't like your boss. You don't like your company culture. That's what's stressing you out. For some of you, it's a financial problem. You got an unexpected bill. Maybe the bills have been stacking up. You ever go through those seasons of life where it's like bill, 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 bill. Every time you turn around and it's like stacked up high. And it's like, how do I keep up with all of this? And the world's so expensive someday. It could be anything, right? And when you look at your list, if you have anything written down or if you're just thinking about it, what's your number one challenge today? What's the trial that's causing the most stress for you today? You're most worried about this. You're most anxious about this. What is the number one thing? And the goal is that we would turn quickly to God with each of those, but especially what I want you to think about is that number one. Okay, so what do? We turn quickly to God Stop relying on ourselves. We rely on God, and it begins this way. And this is now the actual prayer from King Asa in 2 Chronicles 14. Number 3, we admit our inability. We admit our inability. There are things we can do and things we can't do, and so we're going to come to God and we're going to admit our inability. Look at how, by the way, if you've never heard me talk about it, those 3 words at the bottom, those are the power words of Christianity. All of Christianity begins with those words, God, I can't. I mean, you won't even know God until you get to that point where you say, God, I can't make myself acceptable to you. Because if you think you can, you will never know him. Because you don't need Jesus then. If you can just figure it all out yourself, then you don't need Jesus. Nothing happens till you get to the point where you're comfortable saying, God, I can't. I can't solve this. I can't figure it out on my own. King Asa stood in front of God and facing this army and this opposition. He said, Asa cried out to the Lord his God. He said, oh Lord, no one but you can help. Look at this. No one can help you help the powerless against the mighty. He was saying, I'm the powerless one. I'm the powerless one. So I don't know what's on your list when you look at your list, but I know what's on my list. And here's my honest confession to all of you, which God has heard me say. There is no way I'm wise enough to deal with some of these problems. I'm not wise enough. I can't figure them out. There's no way I have the resources to handle some of these things. I can't. I'm just not rich enough. I'm not capable of dealing with all of these challenges. I'm not. So what is it that you need to admit to God? God, this is where I'm at. I'm not. I can't deal with this one. I'm powerless. Number 4, then you ask God for help. Ask God for help. And look at how Asa does it. I love Asa's response when he says, I'm powerless, but you're not, oh God. So help us, oh Lord our God. And it's just that simple, help us. I love this prayer because he doesn't tell God how he wants him to help him, right? There's nothing in this. I put the whole prayer up. It's not very long. He never says, and help us by, he just says help. This is important because sometimes I've watched myself and many other Christians get in trouble because we tell God how he's supposed to help us. It's like, I hate my job, I hate my boss, it's not providing, so God, help me by giving me this job. And God in heaven is sitting there going, are you kidding me? You think your boss is bad. If I give you that one, you're going to be turning around, you're going from the frying pan into the fire. But we don't know that, right? So we tell him how to help us all the time, and then he goes, no, because he loves us, and that would be bad for us. And then what do? We get mad at him. See, this prayer stuff doesn't work. God doesn't help, because I asked for his help, and he didn't help me. But because he loves us, he said no, and we don't know that. So stop telling specifically. We do it all the time. You see, it's like, God, give me that boy or girl. It's like, oh, yeah, this is awesome. Then it's like, hey, God, change this boy or girl, because wow, then it's like, God, remove this boy or girl, right? It's like, we do it all the time. We do it all the time. Help, help, help. And we tell him how to help us, and we get ourselves in a lot of trouble because we're constantly telling rather than just saying, God, I don't even know what to ask for. I don't know what would be best for me. So I'm just asking for your help. It was interesting as I was prepping this message this week. It's like some of the things on the back of my notes. I hadn't even sat down once and said, would you just help me with this? I was stressed, anxious, worried, trying to figure it out, and I'd never even done what I'm telling you to do until this message really made me think it through. I wonder, when you look at your list, if there's anything on there that you haven't even asked him for help on. He's promised. He wants to help. He loves helping. He wants to be more involved in our lives. If we'll just ask. I love what this one author said. God's not a genie in a bottle who will grant us our wishes. He's a loving Father who wants to give us what is best for us, even if it's not what we want. Yep. So stop telling and just ask. I just need your help. And then the final thing is this, and this is the other sentence. So I told you there were two sentences I couldn't get rid of. I could not shake. This is the sentence that's been the most important to me. Missing out was the first one, and this is the one I really can't shake. And I'll show you what Asa prayed as he stood in front of this overwhelming army, and he said, God, we are powerless. Would you please help us? And then he said this, help us, O Lord, our God, for I love this, we trust in you alone. Would you underline those words? We trust in you alone. We trust in you alone. So that phrase has me thinking. I've been thinking about that phrase for a month. Because some people would have questions about it. It's like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that, I have these problems, right? You've got stuff on the back of your notes that are problems and obstacles and trials and difficulties and things you can't solve in your own strength or wisdom or resources. All right, so trusting Him alone, does that mean we just quit trying? We just go home? Go home, everybody. Lay on the couch and watch whatever you want to watch and eat Velveeta and chips or chocolate, whatever your thing is, and just ignore the problems in your life because God is going to do it all for you. You don't have to do a thing, right? That's awesome. Well, it's not exactly the way it goes. Trusting in God alone doesn't mean we become lazy. George Mueller put it this way. He said, you work with all your might, but you trust not in the least in your work. You work as if everything depends on you, but you trust as if everything depends on God. Okay, so it's not that I'm not going to work hard. So if you need a job, it's not that you don't update your resume and send resumes out. It's not that you don't work hard, but do you trust in the work that you're doing? No. You still do the work, but you trust in God alone. You trust in God alone. God, you're the one that's going to guide me to the right place. You're the one that's going to help me find the right job. You're the one that's going to open up the right place for me to be in. I'm going to do all that I can do, but I don't trust my work. I'm trusting God in you and you alone. You're the only one that can help. So with these things on the back that are on the back of my notes, if you've been listening to me talk in this series about relying on God in these situations, you probably can guess what I did. I immediately wrote out that phrase, I trust in you alone, and I put it in a sticky note and I hung it up on my desk. And I read it constantly during the day. I trust in you alone. I trust in you alone. And you know when I know that I need that phrase? Is whenever I find myself starting to worry about anything on the back. The moment I start to worry about it and get anxious about it and start feeling stressed again, I know that I've taken control back from God. I know that I've started to say, you know what, you're cool and all, but I'm going to figure this out on my own. And then I get the consequences. I'm worried. I'm anxious. I'm stressed. It doesn't help. So remember I said you turn back as quickly as you can, and I turn back with that phrase. This is my key phrase right now. I turn back with the phrase, I trust in you alone. I trust in you alone. I trust in you alone. And I say it over and over again all the time, all day long, whenever I'm worried about any of those things that are too big for me to handle, which is pretty much a lot of things. Now, what happens when you do this? Chances are you've probably never heard of this woman's name. Her name is Jackie Pullinger. When she was about 25 years old, she became a Christian not long before that, and she really wanted to be a missionary. She felt like God was calling her to go leave England where she lived and go be a missionary. She applied to the missions agencies, and they're like, you're too young to go. You're too young to go. This is probably about in the 1940s and 50s. And so she had a prayer. She was just praying to God. God, I want to be a missionary. Just show me where to go. Show me what to do. And she had this dream. And in the dream, she went to Hong Kong. And so she really prayed about this. And she felt like God was saying, go to Hong Kong. So she got on a boat and she sailed. And she got off at Hong Kong with $10. And she went into the country and she came to a place called the Walled City. That's literally what it looks like. That's not photoshopped. That's what the Walled City looked like in Hong Kong. It was a place, it was a kind of a disputed area between Hong Kong and China, and so both governments left it alone. It was a place of unbelievable violence, drug abuse, prostitution. It was open and rampant. Police seldom went in there. There were somewhere between 50 to 100,000 people living in this, and they were just stacked up in this small little, I think it was 3-acre area. As you can see, I mean, just stacked. A few places in there had plumbing, few places in there had electricity. Some did, some didn't. It was run by the triads. You know anything about Chinese mafia? That's the triads. And she walked into this place and she felt so much joy. She felt like she was home, right? Exactly. Joy, not the word we'd have used, right? I mean, the worst slums that you can imagine. This is a street. Many of the streets were no bigger than alleys and just disgusting and trash everywhere. She said in many places you would be drug abuse was rampant. In many places you'd be stepping over people who were strung out on heroin, laying on the ground. And such unbelievable poverty like we've never seen. And so she brought only her faith into this place and the message of Jesus. And she began to talk to people, and she was fearless. In one story I was listening to, she cornered 2 drug dealers one day. She said they were hard to corner because they didn't want to talk to her. And so she said, I trapped them between me and a sewer, and they couldn't go anywhere. And she said, do you mind if I pray for you? And she said, hold your hands out like this because you're going to experience God. And she would pray for people like this, an incredible expectation. And over again, people began to be changed by God. Drug addicts would get off of their addiction, and many times with no withdrawal, which is what she prayed for. And so she began to take people into their house now because they were free from drugs. They had no place to stay, or apartment. So pretty soon she filled her little apartment, and then she would rent other apartments and fill those, and then other apartments and fill those. And over again, she just continued to see God changing people's lives in the worst place that you can imagine, right? And so she had no money. So she just kept relying on God. She just kept relying on God. One time she had no groceries, no way to feed the people that were in her home with her. And so she was just praying about it. And there was a knock at the door. And she opened it up, and there was a man standing there with bags of groceries. And he says, I just felt led by God to bring these to you. He said, I didn't even know where you lived. What are the chances in a place like that you'd knock on the right door? Another time, somebody was just questioning her, saying, How in the world do you make it here? How can you possibly provide for all these people? And as she was trying to explain the work of God, there was a knock at the door, and there was a man there with an envelope full of $100 bills for her. She said, well, here's how. You trust in God, and you will experience God. If you learn to rely on God, you will experience God. And if you choose the easier path, which is self-reliance is the easier path, because you know why? You just do it yourself. I'm not saying it's the better path, but it is certainly the easier path. And if you choose self-reliance, you will never experience God. So here's what I want you to think about as we finish this series today. When you think about the number one stressful thing in your life, the number one trial or difficulty or adversity that's going on in your life today, what is it? Some of you, I doubt if any of you have to think too hard about answering that question. Here's my next question. Have you quit trying to solve it yourself? Are you still relying on yourself and your wisdom and your hard work and your effort and your intelligence and your drive and your ambition and your resources to solve this problem yourself? God will let you go down that path as far as you want to. He didn't stop Asa from emptying out all the gold. He didn't stop him. He could have. He'll let you choose self-reliance, but you'll miss. Then you have that front end, that last part of the story, you miss out. Are you honest with God, telling him what you can't do? Self-reliance says, I can. God-reliance begins with, I can't. Are you asking for his help? And really being careful not to tell him how he has to help you. Are you asking for his help in a humble way, saying, you help me, so that he can lead you in the way he wants to? And then the biggest question of all, are you trusting in him alone? Everything in me fights that last sentence. Trusting in him alone is hard for me to do, because I want to trust in me. But in my life, in all the supernatural stories that I've ever experienced, that's always been the outcome of trusting in God alone. I remember one time, years ago, I was in a situation where financially I could not solve the problem. Remember what I said earlier? What if sometimes God walks you into those, he permits those in your life? Because he wants you to experience his love. You will never know the love of God unless you have needs. If you don't have any needs, how's he going to show you that he loves you? And I sat every morning, I would get up and I would read my Bible again and again and again, and I would bring my need to him, and I would tell him that I needed his help, and I had no idea. I wasn't telling him how to help me. I had no idea how to help me. Day after day went by, and I just kept responding with this: God, I can't, I'm powerless. You're the only one who can help me. Please help. And I didn't know this. I wasn't saying I trust in you alone, but it was how I was acting. And I'll never forget, I was getting right to the finish line where I was going to be in real trouble, and all of a sudden, I got 3 cards in the mail in 24 hours. And 3 people, not knowing what I was going through, not having any idea, decided at that moment of my life to send me money. And the amount of money was exactly the amount of money I needed to make it through that time. And what do you think happened to my faith? If you will trust in God alone, you will start to experience God. Let me have you bow your heads. You know, again, all of this begins with those powerful words, I can't. God, I can't. You know, I mentioned heaven earlier. Heaven is going to be a place where our problems are gone. Thank God. We won't have to deal with taxes, and we won't have to deal with inflation, and we will never have another ache or pain in our body again. I mean, it's heaven. This isn't heaven. Heaven is coming. And the most important thing is that we will be with the God of love. But the only way we get to be with him is by those words, God, I can't. That's it. You will never get to be with God until the day comes when you admit those words, God, I can't. You think I can do something that makes me worthy to stand in the presence of a pure and holy and loving God? I can't. I have nothing to offer this God. Nothing. And incredibly, he offered me everything. He sent his son Jesus into this world to bleed and die on a cross to pay my debt, the debt I owed. I have nothing to offer him. You have nothing to offer him. But if you will just simply get to the end of yourself and tell God, I can't, and ask for his gift, ask for his help in this area, he will give you his son. His son Jesus will forgive you and come and make his home inside of you and change you from within. And if this is what you want today, you want this kind of real relationship with God, say something like this in your heart to him. Say, Jesus, I can't. I cannot make myself worthy. I've been unloving in this world, and I've created a debt that I cannot pay. Would you please pay my debt? Would you please forgive me? Come make your home inside of me today. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Now, as we finish up, can I ask you all to grab this little card out of your program? I know I ask you to do it every week. Just take a moment and if you're a regular attender, just put your name down. But maybe you asked Jesus to forgive you or renewed your commitment today. Check that box. And again, through this whole series, I've been saying, if you want us to pray for you, we have a team of people that will pray for you. Just let us know. Put down your prayer request here. You can, if you don't want to specify it, just put unspoken, and we will pray for whatever need you have in your life that you don't want to write down. So you're welcome to just do that, and we will pray for you. We'll pray for God's help in your life. Then what I'm asking you to do is put in one of the 2 offering boxes back on the back wall where you came in.